we'll start with the author decoder. So we're going to use this profile and this username to decode an author. Hint, decoder help will help here, but slightly altering its type may make things easier. Let's take a look at that decoder help here. So decoder help takes maybe cred, it takes profile, and it takes a username, and it then proceeds to use them to decode stuff. So if we have credentials, if we don't have credentials, and it says, okay, if I'm logged out, I'm definitely not following you. So this is where we get the unfollowed author. If we are logged in, then we might be following you, but we might also be, this is me. So this is sort of that three-way split that we talked about earlier with the author, where it's either I'm following this person, I'm not following this person, or this person is me. So we're starting off by detecting, okay, is this me? If so, then great, then we will succeed with is viewer. And otherwise, we will be like, okay, I'm going to use the non-viewer decoder, which is another helper that essentially checks to see whether or not we're following them according to the JSON, and then succeeds or fails accordingly. Worth noting that this is actually optional, so if the following is not there, then we say, okay, if there's no info on whether we're following this person, that means that we are not following them. And depending on how this thing is being used, it's used in a couple of different places. That may or may not be present on the JSON object we're getting back. Worth noting that because of the way that this is doing these things, it actually doesn't even bother decoding the following field unless it's already checked to see if we're logged out, in which case no need, doesn't matter, we're definitely not following them. And we've also checked to see whether we're the viewer or not. If we are the viewer, then again, doesn't matter, no need to bother decoding it. Okay. So that's what decoder help does. Now, what's this bit about this would be useful, but with a slightly different type? Well, what are we going to decode into when we want to make this author? I mean, decoder help will ultimately give us an author, but it's not quite what we want because essentially at this point we've got custom profile decoder, and we've also got required username decoder. So let's say that I were to put decoder help right into here. Well, that's clearly not going to work because the first argument is it needs to take those credentials so that it can do the logic to branch on these things. Let's say we took it a little bit further and we said decoder help maybe cred. Let's run lmake on this. Actually, let's just run lmake on author so we don't see any of the other mistakes. Okay. Something is off with the body of the decoder definition. The body is decoder of decoder author, but the type annotation on decoder says it should be decoder author. What's going on with that? Well, essentially the problem here is that what we've said here is I'm giving this a decoder, but what it wants is it actually wants some sort of other thing. Like it wants like something that's actually going to resolve. It wants not a decoder author, but rather an actual author. Well, it's not going to really work out for us because what we have here is we have potentially success and we have potentially failure. We have decode.succeed in some branches and failure in other branches. If only we had a way to take a decoder and then branch it into either success or failure, depending on what happened. Which, of course, we do. We have decode.and then. So let's hold off on figuring out what's going to go here for a second and say, let's ultimately, after we successfully decode the profile and the username, let's say that we want to continue on with decode.and then decoder help. Okay, so if we were able to do that, or sorry, decoder help passing maybe cred. If we were able to do that, then we'd be all set. We would be able to successfully continue the decoding process, and it could potentially fail if the decoding succeeded, or sorry, if the decoding failed somewhere later on in the pipeline. So how would we possibly go about doing that? Well, decoder help takes one argument, which is maybe cred, and then it takes two more arguments. But it doesn't have to. I mean, decode.succeed could be, for example, tuple.pair. And then inside decoder help, we could say, I actually just want these two to be stapled together. And then I can destructure them in line in the arguments. And now, we've got something that's actually quite convenient to work with. So we start by succeeding into tuple.pair, which is going to just staple these two together. It'll give us a profile as well as a username inside of a tuple. And then it's going to call decode.and then, passing that tuple as the other argument to decoder help, at which point we destructure it, move along, and Bob's your uncle. So let's take a look at what that does. It compiles. So we've now successfully decoded the profile, decoded the username, and then gone on to decode the rest of the author, potentially failing along the way, depending on what happens in these various different branches. So that's the first of two. But we had another to do, which was over here in timestamp. So this is our ISO 8601 decoder. And this one we're going to use decode.and then more directly. So it says use the following function to decode this time.posix value. ISO 8601.toTime. That takes a string followed by a result. And we don't care about the error type here. So we're just going to ignore that. And then a time.posix for the success value. All right. So the way I like to start off by writing things like this is just focus on what's the first thing we want to decode. In this case, that's a string. So I'm going to say decode.string. And once we've got that, then we're just going to pipe it to decode.and then. And I'm just going to call this decoder help. So what is decoder help going to do? Well, and then always takes a function which starts by taking the successfully decoded value, which in this case is going to be a string, and then returns a decoder of the desired value, which is to say a time.posix. Oops. Okay, now that we've got the types written out, we know that we're going to get a string, and we want to use this somehow to either return a success decoder or a failure decoder. So we're going to call ISO 8601.toTime on the string. That's going to give us back, as we can now see here, a result. So we're going to do a case on that. If the result was successful, then we've got some time, and we will decode.succeed with that time. Not Tim, time. And if it failed, we're going to just ignore the error message and say, oh no, it didn't work. All right. Let's see if that compiles. Oh, you know what? I think I can just go back to compiling main now because author, we already know, works. Hey, success. It compiles.